Welcome to the 110th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford. Stay tuned for my interview with horror novelist David Wellington, the author of many horror novels including Plague Zone and 32 Fangs. Stay tuned for the interview. Welcome back to the Reading and Writing Podcast. My guest today is David Wellington. David is the author of many popular horror novels, including Monster Island, 13 Bullets, and Frostbite. He also had a fantasy trilogy published under the pen name David Chandler. David also has written for comic books with Marvel Zombies. David, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Jeff. Great to be here.
Sure. Well, first I wanted to see if you could read the first 3 or 4 paragraphs of one of your new novels, Pass Fail.
Absolutely. I've got it right here in front of me. This is a book that I've released on various e-reader platforms. It is not available as a print book. It's only an ebook at the moment. But it's doing pretty well, and I've really enjoyed writing this one, so I'm glad to share this with everybody. Okay, let's start with Chapter 1.
Right.
Pass Fail. Jake McCartney ran a finger across the row of initials on the underside of his bedside table. They had been carved into the wood, gouged into it, then gone over with a Sharpie marker. The letters were very small and toward the back of the table where he would never have seen them if he hadn't dropped his pencil and had to get down underneath the table to fish it out. His own initials repeated 7 times. When had he done that? He couldn't remember it. He'd had the table since he was little, though, since before he could remember much. He smiled to himself, picked up the pencil, and started to climb back out from underneath. That was when the car hit the house. Jake smacked his head on the edge of the table, an impact that made his ears ring. Or maybe that was just the sound of metal crumpling, of the house shaking down to its foundations. He jumped up to his feet and ran out into the hall to see his mom leaning out of her own doorway, asking what had happened. "Earthquake?" she asked, looking terrified. Jake shook his head and hurried down the stairs. It was just after 7 o'clock on the last day of summer before his senior year of high school. At the front door, his father tried to grab his arm. Jake pushed past, shrugging an apology, and leaned out onto the porch. Flames leapt up under the ornamental cacti at the side of the house, and he jumped back in a hurry. "Kiddo," Dad shouted, "get back inside." But Jake had seen something through the flames, and he rushed out into the evening air. There was a car wedged into the side of the house, a bright red SUV with its front end smashed into the brick wall. Fire swarmed across its bent hood, and it had engulfed one of the tires, which melted and spat gouts of burning rubber. In the distance, Jake heard a siren and knew the fire department was on its way. So far, the flames hadn't spread to the wood trim on the side of the house. Maybe it would be okay. Maybe he should go back inside. A hand smashed against the driver's side window from the inside. The interior of the car was filled with dark smoke, and Jake couldn't really see inside, but the hand, the palm smearing across the glass, the fingers scratching wildly. The hand fell away almost as abruptly as he'd seen it appear. There was somebody in there. "Jake! No, Jake!" Dad shouted from the doorway. "Wait for the fireman." Jake wondered what he was talking about until he looked down and saw that he was running toward the car. He hadn't even thought about what he was doing. He looked up at the houses around him, the white and yellow and light blue houses that looked exactly like his own. Lights were coming on in the windows. People were crowding out onto their porches to see what happened next. Nobody was moving to help him. They were just watching. Maybe they hadn't seen the hand. Maybe nobody had seen it but Jake. "There's somebody inside," he shouted, but no one else moved. As he got close to the car, the heat grew intense and smoke bit into his nose, into the roof of his mouth. He coughed and threw an arm up over to cover his face as best he could. He reached for the handle of the car door and nearly burned his hand. It was hot enough to raise blisters. He pulled down the sleeve of his hoodie and covered his hand with it as best he could and tried again, but the handle didn't move. Either the door was locked or, no, it was wedged shut. He could see where the mangled front end was holding it closed. He tried kicking at a flap of metal that held it shut, and his shoe caught on fire. He stamped it out on the ground. Coughing into his sleeve, he looked around for anything he could use as a pry bar. The best he could find was a garden rake leaning up against the side of the house. It would have to do. He ran back to the car to try to lever open the door, but just as he arrived, the burning tire exploded in a rush of superheated air that spattered him with flaming rubber. He beat at his chest and arms with his sleeves until he was no more than smoldering, then returned to the door with the rake. There was just one piece of the wheel cowling that looked like it was pinning the door. If he could just shift it a little. The rake's handle cracked in his hands, but he kept heaving, kept pushing as the heat of the fire seared his exposed face. He could feel his eyebrows curling up, could smell nothing but burning gasoline. And then, the cowling bent back, away from the door. Jake threw the rake away and grabbed at the door handle, ignoring the heat that seared his hand. The car door flew open and thick oily smoke washed over him, blinding him, choking him. He pushed forward through it and reached inside the car. He couldn't see a thing, but his hands found something soft and yielding and lifeless. Maybe he was too late. Maybe the car's driver was dead, but it didn't matter. You couldn't just leave a dead person to burn up inside the car like that, could you? He tugged and pulled, and when the body resisted him, he finally realized it might still be strapped in with a seatbelt. Still not daring to breathe, he reached around and found the release button, then hauled the body out of the car and ran down the driveway to the street, away from the smoke and the flames. It was a girl. Why don't I stop there?
Okay.
That was probably more than you wanted, but I keep going.
No, that's fine. That's fine. So, if the listeners haven't heard or haven't read or heard about your novel Pass Fail yet, how would you describe the novel?
I don't like to describe it too much. It's
Okay.
it's a tricky book. It's supposed to be surprising. There's a lot in it that is not what it seems at first. And one of the things about the book is that even the first sentence it turns out to mean something completely different than what you think by the end of the book. It's about a guy who he's a senior in high school. He's done very well, and he's going to be the valedictorian of his high school class. So, but the first day of school, his senior year, his guidance counselor calls him in, and he says, you're the smartest kid in this school, so we're going to put you in a special program. From now on, everything you do is on a pass-fail basis. And if you pass all your tests, great, you're going to have a bright future ahead of you. But if you fail more than 3 tests this semester, I'm personally going to take you behind the school gymnasium and put a bullet in the back of your head. So, it's not the typical teenage high school story.
Nope. Great. Well, with the Amazon Kindle, it's very easy now for someone to self-publish their novel or short stories. However, when you originally achieved your first success as a published writer, you had a really unique story. You started writing your novel on a website. And again, this was well before the Kindle and ebook craze. Can you explain exactly what led you to write Monster Island and publish it online?
Yeah, it was a dare. Yeah, my entire career started on a dare, which is I've never really gotten over the irony of that. I've been writing since I was 6 years old. I was 35 at the time, I guess, and I had been trying to get published since I was a teenager, and just never got anywhere. It was just wasn't possible, and I was just beating my head against the wall, and I knew I was going to keep writing, but I thought, well, maybe I'll just never be a published writer. I'll just have to live with that. But that was my dream. I mean, that was what I wanted when as long as I can remember, that was what I wanted, was to be a published writer. So I had a friend who had a blog, and he was tired of working on the blog, and he said, "Well, I'll give you my blog. You can write there." I was like, I'm not a journalist. I'm not looking to write nonfiction. I want to write novels. And he said, "Yeah, just write a novel, put it on my blog." I hemmed and I hawed, and he dared me to do it. And we got together. We had sushi one night for dinner, and we talked about it. And I can't remember what my original idea was, but he said it's got to have zombies. And I said, which is funny because it's a zombie novel. There's no question about that. But I think it started out as like science fiction. It went through a lot of changes very early on. But
and so, what time frame are we talking about here?
It was at dinner that night, and that was a Friday night. And I said, "Sure, give me 6 months to put something together." And he said, "No, you start on Monday." So,
and what year?
said,
what year? I meant, what year was this that you?
Oh, 2003. This was 2003.
Okay, 2003.
Yeah. he said you start on Monday. So I wrote the first chapter of a zombie novel, basically, overnight, and put it on the blog. And I think two or three people saw it, and one of them I had to tell them to go look at it. So it was it wasn't a huge success, but it was fun. So I wrote the second chapter, put that up 2 days later, and I think 17 people saw that one. Uh, by the end of the month, I had however many chapters it was. I can't. That's like 12 chapters. No, 16 maybe. And I had something like 40,000 people reading it. Uh, it was crazy. I was writing it as fast as people were reading it, and I just had never done anything like that before.
So you were truly, you were truly serializing it, meaning you were writing it as people were reading it and putting it up.
Yeah, absolutely. I would write a chapter the night before, put it on the blog, and people would read it the next day and comment on it, which was actually it was a huge thing. Was the commenting, and I feel like I learned so much about writing because I had this instant feedback. I just had people telling me exactly what worked and what didn't work, whether they hated it or they loved it. There were characters who I thought were minor characters who would just be in one scene, but the response was so incredible that they became major characters. They became the focus of the book. It's a I look back and I'm like I imagine trying to write a novel like that now, and I would pull my hair out. It was so incredibly weird. It's totally the wrong way to write a book. That when you write a book, you need to know everything in advance. You need to sit down and outline. You need to know how it's going to end. You need to know who the characters are. But that book, it was just so much fun and just so exciting. And it was a ton of hard work because I was just working on that website every day, just all day long.
How often were you updating it?
3 times a week, every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. People ask me all the time about serialization, and they're like, "Well, I can put a chapter up every month or two." And I'm like, "No, no, you can't. People aren't going to come back after 2 months to read another chapter. You have to keep publishing all the time to keep people's interest." Uh, and but I was just so on fire with just this excitement and just the fun of it that was fine. I was totally willing to devote my life to this project for 5 months.
And were you working a day job at the time, or were you solely working on this?
I had a day job. I wouldn't say I was working at it. It was because I was doing this. I was literally doing this at my job. And I was lucky that my boss was a friend of mine and didn't really take the job seriously either. And so I didn't get fired. He complained a little bit that wasn't producing. I was working at the United Nations, actually. It was we were doing a library project. I was also working at the time and getting my master's in library science, so it was it was a busy year.
Yeah, I can say. So do you remember any of the specific comments or kind of the general theme that people would leave you in terms of the feedback?
Well, 99% of the comments were, "I love this," or "This is great. What's next?" or something like that. Which was great because that's encouragement, and any writer needs encouragement, especially when you're just starting out. You're so unsure of yourself. You don't know if anyone's going to like what you're writing. You don't know if it makes sense. Some of the comments were people guessing at plot developments that were about to happen,
Right.
which was frustrating because they always got it right. They always do. So when I had some big twist that I was sure was going to shock everybody, some commenter would come up with, "Oh yeah, it turns out he's actually a zombie," and I was like, "Oh no, what am I going to do?" And I would have to actually go with the opposite twist. No, the guy's not a zombie, even though you thought he was. And explain it somehow.
Sure.
Which,
so were you did you do during this 5 month process? Did you do anything proactive in terms of shooting an email to some reporter or some blogger and say, "Hey, look what's going on over here"? Or was it totally organic, word of mouth?
Um, There was well, it's actually kind of a hard question to answer. I didn't do much. My friend who owned the blog, right? It was still in
Mhm.
his name. He got excited about the project too, and he started doing weird stuff. We ran contests and had there was a the first contest was anybody who could bring us 200 hits in a day, 200 new readers essentially, would get to be in the book. They got their name and their likeness in the book, and and it turned out two people won at the same time. It was simultaneous. Two guys got the 200 readers in a single day. And so the two of them appear in the book as guys who get eaten by zombies. And it's one chapter. You could cut that chapter out of the book entirely and nobody would notice. But I still get people, writing me and saying, "Oh my God, that was my favorite chapter with those two guys." That really summed up the zombie experience. I was like, man, I wrote that because that was promotional. It was
Right.
just that was marketing.
That's
But
pretty
people love
funny.
that scene, and the two guys who I emailed the guys who won, and I said, "Listen, I can, this is a pretty gruesome novel. If you want, you tell me how much gore you're comfortable." And both of them said, "Make it bloody, make it disgusting." So it really is. It's the most disgusting chapter in the entire book.
Wow. So you mentioned earlier this whole experience. So a sushi dinner on Friday night, and your friend said, you're going to start on Monday, and we're going to post it, and then a month later, you had 40,000 readers. I mean, can you remember back? I mean, when you realized that you were gaining a readership of 40,000 people after, in your words, writing from the age of 6 to the age of 35 without much success, or much outward success in terms of publication. Well, what did that feel like to you?
It was all happening so fast. It didn't feel like success. It felt like fun. It felt like I was excited. I was excited all the time. And uh, honestly, when I got the book deal, that was a very strange thing. It uh, it happened because Mark Frauenfelder, who was one of the editors at BoingBoing.com, read the book and liked it. And so he called his publisher and said, "Oh, you might want to check this out. It's interesting, from a publishing perspective. This guy is doing this online and he doesn't have a publisher." So that publisher said, "Oh, yeah, that is interesting. I'll take a look." And the next day he emailed me and said, "Can I buy your book?"
Wow.
Um, yeah,
And had
well,
you finished at that
it's
point?
no. Well, yeah, I had finished the first book, but he wanted three.
Oh, okay. Okay.
And I had already decided I was going to write three books, so that wasn't a problem. But I would say, halfway through the second book, uh, serializing it the same way. All three of those books were serialized, in real time, essentially.
Right. Right.
And I said, "Well, I've got a book and a half. I can, He said, "No, I want all three books. I don't care what the third one is." He's like, "Sight unseen, I'll just take it. If you have 40,000 people hanging on your every word, that's a book I want to publish." And this guy he was taking a huge chance, especially back then. Nobody had any idea that this sort of thing worked.
Right.
And there were a lot of signs it wouldn't work. Just because something is famous on the internet doesn't, and I use famous advisedly. But just something is popular on the internet does not mean it's going to work in the real world. But this guy, this publisher, really nice guy, John Oakes, just said, "Yeah, I believe in it. Why not? Why not take a chance? Why not, just take a
And he
risk,
didn't
see
he
what
didn't
happens?"
have he didn't have a problem the fact that the three books were serialized and were out there online.
No, no, not at all. I've met a little resistance for that because I kept serializing for quite a while, and long after the zombie books were done, I serialized some more books. I've met a little resistance from that since, and actually more recently. But at the time, he was like, "It's free advertising.
That's
It's
great.
on the internet," and he knew that nobody wants to click through 60 or 100 web pages to read a book. Uh, they want it all at once.
Right. Right.
They want something to just read, like an ebook or a published book, a paper book, which at the
Right.
time was the only real option.
So is
Yeah.
that original serialization version of Monster Island? Is it still out there online and available?
Oh yeah, it's on my website,
Okay,
davidwellington.net.
gotcha, gotcha.
Uh, yeah, all the serials are still there. There's been, it's so weird because, what's fascinating is you put something for free on the internet and then people want you to support it and spend, your time and energy making their life more convenient because, it's free.
Right.
So obviously, it should be perfect. There was at one point one of the serials was, and I didn't think anybody was still reading these things. These are all 10 years old now.
Right.
And on the internet, that's it's the age of the dinosaurs. But I get email all the time, and somebody said, "Well, there's a problem with page 34 of
Oh
Monster Nation,
God.
and I can't believe you wouldn't keep your website up and running properly." And I was like, "Are you kidding? I wrote that book 10 years ago. I've got like 12 books since then." Uh, but I went back and I looked, and yeah, there was a problem. The files had gotten corrupted, so I got those fixed. Uh,
Well,
but
well,
yeah, it is amazing.
that's funny. Well, in previous interviews, you've mentioned that before you started writing Monster Island on the website, and you mentioned it earlier as well with us that you had written a lot of novels that had never been published, and that you had been writing since you age 6. I'm curious what kept you going back, because I'm sure you're very aware. Lots of people say, "I'm going to write a novel," and then they sit down and they write 60 or 70 pages, and a lot of those people are really, really surprised when those 60 or 70 pages of their first novel turn out to be pretty bad, and they just give up. But obviously, you didn't give up. You kept writing. What kept you going back to the keyboard?
I guess some kind of neurological damage. I must have gotten hit in the head when I was a kid or something. I don't know. No, I honestly, I just love it. I love telling stories. It's something, yeah, I get people emailing me all the time, I want to be a writer. I want to be a writer. I said, well, okay, what have you written? What are you working on? And they're like, well, no, I need your advice on how to get started to be a writer. And I'm like,
Right.
well, you have a word processor on your computer. You open that up, and there's a blank screen there, and the keys in front of you on the keyboard, you press those. That's how you become a writer. I'm being mean. I
Right.
try to be much more nice in the emails, but it's
Sure, sure.
you know if you want to be a writer, you write. You don't
Yeah,
talk about it. That's harsh. That's harsh because talking about it does help. I've been in a lot of great writing workshops. I've got a great writing group right now. We meet like twice a month and read each other's stuff, and then we go have dinner. And it's mostly about going to have dinner. But
right,
it's
right.
that camaraderie is great too.
Sure.
Knowing there are other people out there doing the same thing, and everybody has the same problems. And I write 4 books a year, and people are like, "That's crazy! What How do you must have just some drive inside of you?" I was like, "No, I open up the word processor and I stare at it for hours,
Right,
and I
right.
think, God, what the hell am I going to do? Oh my God, I have to write a book. I have to write another book. What am I going to do?" And then an idea comes to me, and voila, I just start going.
Sure, sure.
Uh, but that's the thing. It's like if nobody should want to be a writer. People should want to tell a particular story. That is the main thing. If you have a story in your head that you need to tell, and a novel is the best way to tell that story, because it often isn't. Most people will be better off writing screenplays, probably. There's a lot more money in it, for one thing.
Right.
But if you have to tell that story, you're gonna tell it, and maybe you do it terribly. When I say I've got 20 books on my hard drive, everybody says, "Oh my God, let us see those books. I really want to read that book." I'm like, "No, you don't. You honestly do not want to read this book. And I don't want you reading it because you'll lose all respect for me. This is a book I wrote when I was 12,
But
It's
I
it,
do
it,
I do think it's interesting, because I think that, I hear what you're saying. I mean, you get the emails people send you, and you tell them, like, open up your word processor. But I do think it's interesting, because I think that, again, going back to this example, I think there are a lot of people who, have that desire to write, but they don't have what it takes to write 20 bad novels before they write a good one. And I'm just
Yeah.
curious, I mean, with yourself, what kind of kept you going back, even if you wrote a novel that, maybe at the time, maybe you're looking back in hindsight knowing it's bad. I don't know if you knew it was bad at the time, but you kept going. I'm just curious.
Oh, I knew it was bad. Yeah, no, I knew. I that I mean that's what got me started writing was I thought I could do better
Yeah.
than everybody else. I
But
remember
I mean, were
reading
you
just a
were
lot
were
of
you
really
were you telling yourself that you're like, this is the process. I got to write some bad stuff before I can write something good.
oh no, no, no. I thought I was brilliant. I thought I was brilliant and I couldn't figure out why my novels sucked.
Okay.
Um it, you know, it was I read a lot of really terrible science fiction novels when I was a kid, just dreadful stuff, and thought, well, I could do better than this. So, I want to do better than this. This is, the central idea of this book is great, but the writer couldn't write his way out of a paper bag. So I'd say, well, I want to write a good novel with that idea, which of course is stealing somebody else's idea, and that's very wrong. Don't ever do that, kids. But so yeah, I would just sit down and I would say, well, how would I write this book to make it better? Which meant there were a lot more spaceships and a lot more, space battles and laser guns. Um, it was a lot more like Star Wars. But when you're a kid, that's what you think is cool, and that's what you write. You should always write what you think is cool because that's what other people will think is cool, and that's what works.
Sure.
Um,
Well, were you also
the real
writing
question,
short stories? Go ahead. Sorry, I interrupted you.
it's okay. It's okay.
No, no.
The real question you're asking is why did I stick with it? And it's just I'm avoiding that question because it's so hard to answer. I stuck with it because I didn't have anything better to do. I don't know. I stuck with it because I loved telling stories. I stuck with it because every once in a while, in 100 terrible pages that I will never show another human being, there'd be one sentence that was actually kind of cool, or there'd be one image that I just couldn't get out of my head. Um, yeah, it was incredibly discouraging. I had people telling me to stop all the time. I had people saying you need to actually like get a job. You need to support yourself somehow, and you're not going to do it with this crappy writing. Um, but I don't know. It was in me. It really was. It's very hard to describe, but I never didn't want to write. I never reached a point where I was fed up and didn't want to do it anymore.
Sure. What
Yeah.
I should have probably asked this at the beginning. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about, you said you started when you were 6. Do you remember, that first desire or what kind of drove you to say, I have a story and I'm gonna sit down and write it? Do you remember that?
Yep, the book was called Santa Claus versus the Smurfs. It was it was a deep philosophical novel. There was a lot of psychodrama and
Yeah, it
just
sounds like it.
darkness. Now, I had a bunch of Smurf dolls, action figures, whatever you want to call them. They weren't very actiony for action figure. I had way too many of them, and I would arrange them in these scenes, these incredibly elaborate scenes that would take me all day because I was a kid and I didn't have a job, so I had plenty of free time. And and I would tell myself stories about these Smurfs and what they were doing in Smurf Town or whatever, Mushroom Village, and I decided that I was going to write it down. And somebody had told me that you should throw something in commercial in there at the age of 6. So I said, well, Santa Claus. Everybody likes Santa Claus. So the story was that the Smurfs, discovered Santa Claus up there at the North Pole, and he was enslaving all these like small peoples. So they had to rescue the elves, and then eventually they found out that Santa Claus was a nice guy. Big shocker. I know that was the twist ending. Santa Claus was not the villain.
Gotcha. So along the way, were you also writing short stories, or have you always gravitated more to novels?
I've always written short stories. I had a time in college when I realized I didn't know how to write a novel. That was after writing 20 of them. And so I started writing short stories because I thought that that would teach me how to write novels. A lot of the decisions I've made in my writing career have just not made any sense in hindsight. Um, but when I was in graduate school, I got an MFA in creative writing, which, you know, yay for me, but didn't really help much. Uh, it was, but it was great. My teacher at my MFA program actually said, I don't know what I'm doing with you guys. I'm not teaching you how to write books because nobody can teach you how to do that, which is kind of true. But what I can do is give you 2 years where you don't have to do anything except write. And so I took her at her word and I just wrote. I would go to my classes and nod politely and talk about, why Paul Auster or Ernest Hemingway was the greatest writer ever lived. And then I would go home and I would stay up all night writing short stories about robots and spaceships and stuff. Was writing about 5,000 words a day at that point on top of all my classes because I was young and had energy. And that was all short stories. Short stories are so different from novels, and everybody says that. Nobody believes you when you say it. It's fascinating, and short stories have turned into these little mini novels, and it's strange because a really good short story, and I'm going way back. I'm talking like The Monkey's Paw or The Lady and the Tiger,
Right.
Most dangerous game. Really good short story is like getting punched in the face. Whereas, a really good novel is being suckered into a horrible con game. And so it's a completely different experience reading them, which means that everything about writing them has to be different too. And what I have discovered from writing, I don't know, hundreds of short stories, is that I don't know how to write short stories, but I'm pretty good at novels.
Interesting. So in this MFA program and this experience that you just described, were you turning in those short stories about robots, or were you writing completely different, more literary type stuff for your class assignments?
I made a horrible mistake when I was younger because I was dumb, and I applied to and got into a creative writing program for literary fiction. I did not know that there was something like Clarion, which is the science fiction writing workshop. I didn't know that you could like find professors who actually liked science fiction and write for them. I thought that all creative writing programs were the same. So I got into this one, and the first day I think I turned in a science fiction story, and the teacher and all the other students just looked at me like I think you might be in the wrong room. Nobody's divorced in this story. Nobody's going through longing over a lost child. Nobody's, exploring the deeper mysteries of being and suffering. And I was like, no, it's about a robot. So I stopped doing that. I stopped bringing the robot stories to those classes. And I in fact wrote a novel-length literary novel for my thesis and got my degree. And no one will ever see that book. It's not something I'm proud of. I wrote it specifically for my thesis advisor. I wrote it in the style that he wrote because that's what he wanted to see, and I wrote it in to the standards of my classes, and it was soul crushing to realize that you even could do that. I didn't think you could write a book, on spec like that. Just not on spec, but to someone else's specifications. And I didn't know you could do that, but I found it inside me, dug down deep, and found the ability to just ignore every impulse and write something I hated.
So I'm curious. I mean, with your classmates, did you stay in touch with any of them, and have any of them achieved the success that you have?
No, I didn't stay in touch with them, and I don't know. I don't think any of them have achieved any real fame. But I wouldn't necessarily know. I don't read a lot of literary fiction, so they might be out there doing things. They might be writing under pseudonyms. Right. And falling out of contact with them was not. It wasn't that I disliked them. They were all really cool people.
Yeah.
And you can learn You can learn an enormous amount about writing by writing something you don't want to write. So it was not an altogether wasted experience. There was a guy there. He wrote some of the most beautiful sentences I've ever read, and he was writing stories about guys who were working in logging camps. They were cutting down trees,
Hmm.
and that was the whole story. The guy was cutting down trees and thinking about just what that meant in the greater
Right.
philosophical world.
Hmm.
And you wouldn't think it, but you couldn't stop reading those things. I
Sure,
mean,
sure.
the way he wrote about this stuff, it was just beautiful, just stunning. Every sentence, a little marvel. And I talked to him and about how he worked and what he wrote, and I was like, that's nothing like what I do. Uh, it's like the difference between. And I always say that the difference between genre fiction and literary fiction is like the difference between sculpture and ballet. They're both about shapes in space, but they're such completely different disciplines that it's not even, you shouldn't even call them the same art form.
Sure. Interesting.
Um, there are exceptions to that. There are some writers who can bridge that gap, and I'm just in awe of those people.
Right,
I just
right.
they amaze me, and every single time I'm like, how do you do that? It's a magic trick that I've never been able to figure out. But yeah, but so there were some great writers in that program, really cool people, and just friendly and nice and warm, and wanted to help me out. And some of them actually, my second year, some of them actually were like, "I hear you write science fiction. Don't tell anybody, but I do too." And we could share our stories back and forth. But yeah, it's tough to stay in touch with people from school after a while. Everybody just goes so far away.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm in touch with on Facebook, but I don't.
Right.
That's not the same thing.
Sure, sure. Well, given all the writing that you've done and the success that you've achieved to date with your novels being published, what advice would you give someone listening that may just be starting out on their own writing journey, and they'd like to have their novels published and obviously write? What advice would you offer them that you haven't mentioned yet?
Don't be scared of anything you hear on a podcast or online or reading in a book. Anybody who talks about writing is either A, going to tell you exactly what you want to hear, which is useless. They're going to tell you, yeah, you can do it too, and here's how, and here's the 15 easy steps to writing a novel. That's useless. But anybody who tells you, don't even try it, kid, you're not going to make it, that's useless too, because maybe you will. And they don't know. I don't know. Anybody listening to this podcast right now, if you're a writer, just keep writing. Have fun with it. Don't ever let it become a job or a chore, because that'll just kill your interest in it and you'll stop doing it. Write what's cool to you. Write what's fun for you. If you have fun working on the book, people will have fun reading it. Um, More practical advice is know how a book is going to end before you start writing the first word. Uh, I know there are a lot of writers out there, and there are a lot of books on writing that tell you create a character and then ask that character what they want to do today and see how their life goes. And that is great if you're Stephen King, because Stephen King has an incredible instinct for a story. He knows how to take some random character and get the best story of their life out of them. Writers starting out don't always have that instinct. So the best idea is to think of how the book ends. Think about who is there at the ending of the book. Those are your characters. Think about what they sacrificed to get there. That's your emotional arc. Think about, what route did they drive to get to the ending of your book, and that's your plot. So if you know exactly how the book ends, everything else is just filling in the blanks. It's typing, and that makes it so much easier.
Interesting. I mean, you say that you know how the book is going to end. Um, do you also do extensive outlining in terms of the entire story flow yourself?
Yeah, well, I used to do that because when people say outline, they're thinking something written down. And I used to write things down, and I used to do the index card thing where you put each scene on an index card and you can shuffle them around and so on. I don't do that anymore. It's all in my head now, but that's just practice.
Sure.
Uh, Keeping a whole book organized in your head takes a lot of practice. If you need to write things down on index cards and put them on a bulletin board, if you need to put post-it notes on every surface in your house, reminding you that oh yeah, there was a gun in that scene, and oh yeah, you have to explain how the aliens just disappeared. You do that. You just do that. Anything you can do to organize is worth it. The more organization you do, the more outlining. And outlining doesn't have to be. It doesn't have to be like a 50-page document of every scene. It can just be a quick breakdown.
Sure.
But the more of it you do, the better the final product, I think.
Gotcha. Well, you had a fantasy trilogy published under a pen name David Chandler. Are you planning to write more fantasy novels?
I'd love to if someone wants to buy them. Um, that was not a particularly successful trilogy. It came and it went, which is sad, but it's life, you know.
Sure.
I guess I'm a horror writer. That's what everybody keeps telling me.
Right.
I don't like to be put in a box. I don't like to be told what to write.
Sure.
But people like my horror novels, and the fantasy novels were less successful. Although I do get I get a lot of great encouragement about them. I get the people who do read them seem to really like them. It's just actually finding them
Right.
in the store the
Right.
hard part.
Right. Well, the novel that you read from at the beginning of the podcast is titled Pass Fail, and you recently published that novel along with two others as ebook originals. Why did you decide to do that, and what has that experience been like for you?
I decided to do it because the future is totally uncertain for publishing. It is a very strange time. Nobody knows what's going to happen. With all the bookstores closing down, I mean, basically every bookstore except Barnes and Noble is gone. All the chains. There are a lot of great independent bookstores, and I will give a total shout out to all the independent bookstores out there. There are so many great independents all over the country, and they do great work, and they're wonderful people. But it's hard to sell to them because you're selling to 500 different people. When you can sell a book to Barnes and Noble, you can get that book into the hands of people all over the country with one sale. So it's becoming incredibly hard for paper books to get distributed properly and to get into the right hands. It's a weird thing because right now the top level of writers, the bestsellers, the George R. R. Martins and Stephen Kings, are selling more books than ever. People are reading more. People are reading a lot more than they used to, even 10, 15 years ago. But because the channels of distribution are closing up, the mid-list people like me and the people just starting out and struggling and the small press people we're having a really hard time of it just because we can't get the books to the people who want to read them.
Right.
Ebook solves that problem. Putting something out as an ebook solves that problem. There is no distribution cost for an ebook, or it's minimal. Amazon, Barnes and Noble with the Nook, there are a couple independent ebook company distributors at this point. It's amazing the reach you can get, and it's a weird, wild, woolly new landscape where nobody knows what they're doing, and everybody's trying something new and creative, and that's fun. It really does feel like when I was serializing the books, it's we're making it up as we go along. But it's allowing me to get these books out to people who otherwise probably wouldn't ever see them. And so that is it's an experiment, and it's working, which is great. I love an experiment that works. After a while, you stop calling that an experiment. But that's yeah. After the experimental phase, it becomes how I make my living phase.
Sure.
Which would be great. I mean, I Personally, I love paper books. I love holding a book in my hands. I love the smell of books, and the look of the type on the page, and knowing how many pages left there are, and everything tactile about a book. But ebooks are so convenient.
Sure.
I live in New York City, so I'm riding the subway all the time. That's how we get around in New York. We don't have cars, so because we're weird. I'm on the subway for an hour a day, and there is nothing to do. You can't even look at other people on the subway because they get angry. So I have my phone with me all the time, and it turns out I can read a book on my phone. Problem solved. A whole dead part of my life, that hour a day on the subway used to be the most boring, deadly part of my life. Now it is. I finally have a chance to read more books.
Sure.
It's great. It's
So
wonderful.
are you planning on publishing any more ebook originals?
Absolutely. As long as there are no follow-up questions and you don't want any details, I can say yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes,
to
there will
be
be more.
announced.
Yes, there will be more ebooks. I don't have any titles yet. I don't have any confirmed things yet, but I'm going to do it. It's a lot of work because I'm doing all the work that the publisher would be doing.
Sure.
I'm doing the proofreading, which turned out to be a problem because it turns out I'm not very good at proofreading. I've been getting a lot of comments, unfortunately, about typos in the ebooks, and it hurts. It really hurts because I pride myself on being a clean writer, and just it's so frustrating. But I'll get better at that, and I'll get somebody else to proofread the books. That's the solution.
Sure.
So
you mentioned. Go ahead.
I was just going to say yes. There will be more ebooks. They're forthcoming.
So stay tuned. So.
Yes.
You mentioned reading on your phone. What are some books or authors that you've read in the past year or two that made an impact on you and that you would recommend?
My favorite new discovery is a guy named Felix Gilman, Gilman. The best. He wrote a couple books. What's the first one? The first one is called Thunderer, and then Gears of the City, and those are just beautiful books. They are. I don't know how to describe them. They're not genre books in the sense that you can say, oh, it's steampunk or it's military science fiction. It's neither of those things at all. But they're just these beautiful little fantasy books set in this fantasy city that is not a medieval fantasy city. Yay! And then now he's working on this series called The Half-Made World, which is this sort of steampunk western. Is the best way to describe it, and it's not a very good way to describe it. But they're brilliant. Oh my God, I just love these books. His characters are just so rich, and the world he creates is awesome. So Felix Gilman is great. I discovered him entirely through ebooks and love his books. What am I reading right now? I'm actually reading a nonfiction book right now on my phone called the Disappearing Spoon by Sam Keane, which is a popular science book. It's about the periodic table of the elements and how it was discovered, which sounds, well, you can decide for yourself how that sounds. It's fascinating. It is just, the story is just incredible.
Great. Well, what are you working on now? Can you talk about it? What you're writing?
Well, I can tell you what I'm writing and what I'm publishing. So,
okay,
because there's about a year lag between when I write a book now and when it gets published. So, what I'm publishing right now, the next thing up is going to be a thriller novel. Although it's a horror thriller, and it's a spy book like the kind my dad used to write. But then all of a sudden, the horror elements show up, and it's called Chimera. It's out in July. You can pre-order it now on your favorite website. And it is huge and sprawling and exciting and suspenseful. And the main character is the most sympathetic, relatable character I've ever written in my life. He is a soldier, an army soldier who went to Afghanistan and got his arm blown off. So he's an amputee, but then he gets a replacement robotic arm, one of the new prosthetics that are just so amazing. And gets sucked back into this world of espionage, and but I just love this guy. I mean, the book is a real love letter for me. Love letter is the wrong term because this is going to sound weird, but it's a respect letter. Having seen the people come back from Iraq and Afghanistan, these kids, because they were teenagers, most of them, went over there, did an impossible job. That would have killed me outright. I would not have been able to survive over there, I know. And they come back and they don't complain. They really don't complain. We gave them a crappy job to go do over there. Sure. They came back and they don't complain, and they don't mind. They don't say, "Oh, that was a waste of time." You know, I might say that was a waste of time, but you will never find a soldier who will say, "Yeah, I wasted my time in Iraq. I wasted my time in Afghanistan." They don't say that because they were doing their job, and they did it to the best of their ability in impossible circumstances. So just the immense respect I have for these kids, these people, these men, these women who are coming back. You know, they don't care about the politics. Man, they're just so inspiring. And so I really wanted to write a book about one of these guys, and so I did. And it's called Chimera. It is fun. It's exciting. It's a spy book, but it's also, you know, just a thank you. It's a thank you letter.
That's great. Who's publishing that?
That is HarperCollins. It's going to be a hardback out in July. It can be pre-ordered right now.
Great. And what else are you working on?
Oh, right. You asked what I was working on right now. So right now I'm writing another horror novel. I've written a couple of them in the last 6 months. But this one is different. It's going to be really interesting. It's not as violent as my previous books. I was thinking about guns. And I was thinking about, you know, we talk about violence in the media and how that's affecting people. And I thought, well, how could I write one of my books with no guns in it? And I just thought, you know, I can't. That's what I'm known for. I'm monsters and guns. And so I sat down and I said, well, there's going to be there's a gun in this book. This idea I have, there's a gun in this book, but it doesn't necessarily have to be all about the guns. It doesn't have to be about, you know, violence all the time. So, but how do you write a horror novel with no violence in it? Well, there's plenty of violence. Okay. I'm selling this thing horribly. It's a book about demons is what it is. It's about demonic possession. And so guns are not as useful as you would think because you can't shoot something that's immaterial. So it's about how do you convince the demon to leave its host when it doesn't want to, and how do you cope with having these demons in your head? And it's very psychological, but it keeps the pacing and just the suspense of my books just fine. And it's been a real discovery because I use violence all the time in my books. I use it to keep things moving, and to find other ways to keep things moving is just really interesting. It's been a challenge.
That's great. Well, again, we've been speaking with David Wellington. His latest books available as ebook originals are Pass Fail, Rivals, and Plague Zone. And as he mentioned earlier, his newest book will be published in July, Chimera. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Yeah, close enough.
Yep.
It's kind of,
okay. So check out his latest books, which are ebook originals. You can also check out his website at davidwellington.net, and I'll have a link to that in the show notes. David, thanks for doing this interview.
Hey, thanks so much, Jeff. I really had fun.
Sure, I did too.
If you've got a passion for pumpkin, you've got to get to Dunkin' and pick these up. Our new Pumpkin Cream Cold Brew. Smooth, bold cold brew topped with velvety pumpkin cream cold foam. And our delicious pumpkin spice signature latte. Rich espresso topped with whipped cream, caramel drizzle, and cinnamon sugar. And our perfectly pumpkin donuts, munchkins treats, pumpkin muffins, and more. That's how we pumpkin at Dunkin'. Pick your pumpkin at Dunkin', like our new Pumpkin Cream Cold Brew, pumpkin spice signature latte, and our perfectly pumpkin treats. America runs on Dunkin'. Price and participation may vary. Limited time offer. Exclusions apply.
Hear that? Is that America cheering or a sausage patty sizzling to perfection? It's time to cheer for Egg McMuffin and fresh cracked eggs at McDonald's. It's time to wake up to the aroma of freshly baked biscuits and treat yourself to a real honest-to-goodness morning meal. Breakfast. It's on at McDonald's. Now enjoy a large iced coffee for just $2. Add a breakfast sandwich to make a meal. Prices and participation may vary. Cannot be combined with any other offer or combo meal.